Why are travellers saying they won't cruise, even cruise lovers? Some unexpected and rather surprising reasons beyond the obvious. I'm Gary Bembridge, this is Tips for Travellers. I've been asking and finding out why people don't want to cruise. I had expected some very obvious answers, but I've uncovered some really interesting and unexpected reasons, which I want to share with you. As cruises have started up in Europe, the demand has not been as great as perhaps had been expected. Ships are only allowed to sail between 60 and 70% full. However, all the reports seem to suggest that they're not even able to fill those levels. And in fact, just in the last couple of days that I'm recording this, MSC Cruises have postponed bringing their second ship back into service because they are seeing falling demand and increased cancellations. So what exactly is going on? Why are people saying they don't want to cruise? These reasons are extremely interesting and I think show a lot of the challenges that the cruise lines and the cruise industry are going to have to address and wrestle with if they really want to get cruising back and running. So let's take a look at the reasons that cruisers are saying they do not want to cruise. First of all, the biggest and most important cruising audience is those people that I guess we'd classify as seniors. So people who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s and beyond. They are an enormous and extremely important part of cruising. And for many cruise lines, they are absolutely key to the success of those cruise lines. What I'm seeing in all the comments that I get and asking people, now bear in mind, most of the people who watch my videos tend to be in that sort of age group. And what they're telling me is they don't want to travel and they certainly don't want to go cruising until one of two things happens. Either the whole pandemic passes by and the virus is gone, or secondly, what most people see is more realistic, there is a vaccine available and it's out and proven. So certainly the older audience, which of course are the higher risk category, are saying they do not want to go traveling internationally and certainly do not want to go cruising until there is a vaccine in place. So this is a massive big challenge for the cruise industry because that is a really phenomenally big part of the cruising audience and the numbers on board a ship. So that is certainly one big reason that I'm seeing. The second thing, which I had not really expected, is again amongst people who are big lovers of cruising and go cruising very frequently or been on cruises and want to go again. What those cruisers are saying is the reason they're not keen on cruising is not because they don't love cruising, is because the cruising experience is not what they love. And they don't want to hand over many thousands of dollars to go on a cruise vacation for an experience based on what they're seeing the protocols are likely to be. So as they look at cruises starting up, they're seeing a couple of things that they just don't want to pay to go on vacation to do. So for example, many of the cruise lines have masks involved in some way or other, whether it's the check-in process, when you're indoors in busy spaces, when you're in elevators or out on excursions. A lot of people saying, I don't want to pay to go on vacation and have to wear a mask. I'd rather wait until that's gone. They're also saying that they have some reservations based on their beliefs around the testing protocol. So there's different screening taking place where some cruise lines, so for example MSC Cruises and some other cruise lines require COVID-19 tests before you board, or certainly certificates. Some of them are saying, I don't want to go through that whole testing process. I'd rather just wait until it's safe for me to go without the whole testing process. One of the other things that's happening on cruises is temperature checking at least once a day has become a big part of the process. A lot of people saying, I don't want to go on vacation where I'm constantly reminded that this virus thing is going on, having my temperature checked every day, or potentially when I go off the ship, when I get back on the ship, when I go to dining. And a lot of travelers and cruisers are saying, I just don't want to do that. Also really fundamentally is what they're saying is some of the really big things that they like about cruising are being obliterated or certainly reduced based on the protocols allowing them to sail. So for example, social distancing means things like you have to book to go into certain venues or use the gym or use the swimming pool or have access to some of the shows are restricted and you have to book. People saying, I don't want to go on vacation, have to worry about booking every last little thing that I do. Also, social distancing often means that you have to only dine, for example, and interact in those kind of social occasions only with the people you're traveling with. A lot of people go on cruises because they like to interact, meet lots of people, sit at different people's tables and meet loads of people and socialize. And what they're worried about is with many of these protocols that are being required, that's going to be wiped out the way, and that's one of the key reasons they go cruising. That's especially important for solo travelers because they're saying they go solo traveling and they want to go on a cruise because they can meet loads and loads of people. Another key thing that's putting a lot of people off is if there is a requirement, which is certainly the case on some of the cruises that started up, where you have to go on a cruise line excursion. Now, the reason for that makes sense because what they want to do, particularly as they call on different countries, is they want to protect both the people in the port from being infected potentially and certainly their guests from being infected when they're out and about. People are saying when I go on a cruise, I don't necessarily want the extra cost of excursion, so it's at a cost they don't want to pay, or in fact they like to just go out and self-explore and find their own way around and do their own thing. So what people are saying is a whole lot of the protocols, which are great because they're allowing cruises to resume, are actually meaning that a lot of people are not wanting to go on cruises because it gets rid of the very things about cruising that they like. This again is a massive challenge when cruises start up again, is how are cruise lines going to find a way of creating a vacation experience that both meets the needs of the health authorities and protect the passengers, but also are appealing enough for passengers to want to come on board. Massive big issue, I believe. Another key reason is one which I certainly understand and resonates with me as a person who loves cruising. And this is the fear of going on a cruise and something happens and you find two things happen. First of all, your cruise gets curtailed and you have to head back to port because there's some sort of outbreak or risk of outbreak. And secondly, you then get quarantined on board the ship for an extended period of time, which currently, as you know, quarantining tends to be up to 2 weeks, although with some testing it can be reduced to 5 days. This is what happened, of course, and people saw it happen when the lockdown first started. And certainly a lot of people are nervous about stepping on board a ship in case that happens. And certainly as cruises start up again, a little bit of that happens. So we saw with both Paul Gauguin, with Sea Dream, we saw where there was either a past passenger or someone on board was identified as having tested for the virus. So what happened is the cruise was curtailed, it headed back to port, everyone was tested, everyone was put into quarantine. People are saying, I don't want to spend money when I know that there is a risk, or there is a risk of me having my trip cut short and being quarantined on board the ship or even on land. And that is again another big challenge. It's the whole protocol and understanding how that protocol is going to work. That's holding a lot of people back from committing to cruising. Another thing that's holding people back from committing to cruising is understanding what is going to happen if either they fall ill or have to self-isolate before the cruise, or they arrive at the port and they are refused embarkation on the ship. The cruise lines have been relatively coy so far, certainly in my attempts to find out. So what actually happens if you are refused embarking the ship or during the cruise something happens? People really want to understand what is the cancellation policy, who pays for what, and that's something I think the cruise lines are going to be able to easily resolve as we move forward. But certainly the uncertainty around what happens is putting a lot of people off committing to cruising right now. One of the most obvious and most important reasons for people not wanting to cruise is the perception of cruising. Now, certainly during the whole process and the build up to the lockdown, that terminology, floating Petri dish, sort of entered the general kind of lexicon, if that's the right word, around the world, certainly around the Western world. And cruise ships became identified as these floating Petri dishes. The media pushed the point, and every article you read about cruising, certainly since February, March time, right through the whole period so far, that is constantly referred to. The sense that stepping on a cruise ship is extremely risky. And that has really heightened and locked people's perception of cruising. If they go on board a cruise, it's very risky, and there's a lot of peer pressure from friends, from family, from everybody else. If you talk about going on a cruise, people talk about how unsafe it is. Now, of course, there is lots of evidence that against that, but certainly it's the belief very strongly that there's high risk. That, of course, is reinforced because bear in mind, a lot of what people are being advised in their countries is, the risk of going to nightclubs, going to theatres, going to big public events. A lot of those have a lot of controls. And of course, on board a ship, you have bars, you have nightclubs, you have theatres, you have people in enclosed spaces interacting. So a lot of the things that people have been warned about and told to avoid on land, of course, are a fundamental part of the cruising experience. So there is that whole perception uncertainty still, which still has to be overcome and addressed before a lot of people are going to be prepared to cruise again. So certainly that's the thing holding the vast bulk of people who either haven't tried cruising before but were thinking about it, or perhaps to try one or two cruises. The sense that actually stepping on board a ship is just a risk too far and it's better to stick to land. And that's again going to be a big challenge, I think, for the cruise industry, the cruise lines, as they work through these protocols. And it's probably going to take some cruising and some successful months of cruising before that's going to unlock a lot of people's comfort zone in terms of stepping back on board a cruise. And that, I think, is one of the most fundamental things for the big mass of people going cruising again. What about people who are saying this is a lot of nonsense and I want to step on board a cruise today? There's two real common things that I'm seeing for those people who are going, I want to cruise and I want to cruise now. First of all, they are the absolute die-hard cruisers who see cruising as the ship and the experience itself. They're almost not bothered about where they go. So they're very comfortable to do things like cruises to nowhere. They're very comfortable to cruise around their own country because it's about the cruising experience. Those people are keen to get on board. They know ships. They trust the whole protocols. And the other group of people are also people who believe that the worst of the pandemic is over. I'm seeing lots of comments on the channel around people saying this is overhyped. We need to live our lives and just get on with it. And the risk is being really overplayed. Of course, the health authorities are taking a different view, and they're not letting those people do as they wish to do at that point in time. As I looked at why people don't want to cruise, there are some quite surprising and some, for me, some unexpected reasons for not cruising. I'd love to know what your thoughts are about what is holding you back from cruising if you are in fact feeling that you don't want to step on a cruise ship anytime soon, which I know are many people who watch the channel. I know a lot of you are big fans of cruising because you obviously watch the things that I do, but are holding back and not wanting to cruise. What is your reason? Love to hear. So leave your comments and let me know what you think. Remember, I have loads more videos packed full of tips, advice, updates around everything cruising. So why don't you watch another one of those right now?